Today, we're going to talk about something that kind of came up recently, and I thought this would be a perfect topic. So I took a few notes and came up kind of with my own definitions of these types of people who are often difficult for us to engage with and often leave us feeling insecure, leave us feeling anxious, leaving us with low self-esteem, and leaving us questioning ourselves because of the way they go about interacting with us. But what's tricky is on the outside and to any kind of onlooker, and even to us initially, the things that they do may seem friendly and positive and kind and good intention. You know, something that leaves you beginning to gain this sense of feeling that something's wrong with me because they're fine, right? And so I want to talk a little bit about dealing with these difficult people when their behavior is hard to tease out. Why you leave hanging out with them and spending time with them feeling so crappy about yourself and about that interaction, even though everybody else may look in and say, hey, they were great, or they're so nice, or they're so considerate, or they're so smart. Why do you leave feeling like crap? So the first person I want to talk about, and the one that I like to call, is the star. And this is a person who is loving and fun and always excited to hear from you. And they emotionally act like they really care about you and maybe reach out to you regularly, will say things like, I miss you, how are you? They elicit phone calls and they schedule appointments and always want to meet up with you. However, they consistently make themselves emotionally unavailable to you when the conversation turns to being about you. And so this is a person who expresses really liking you and liking being around you, except it's always about them. When you're talking to them, they will spill and vent and talk to you about everything that's going on with their lives, and they're so grateful to hear your feedback and hear your thoughts about it, and they're constantly seeking your validation and your attention and maybe advice from you about what's going on for them. But they rarely ask you, one, how you are. If they do ask you and you start to answer, you may be able to get a sentence or two, and then bam, the conversation suddenly gets interrupted. They get distracted. They may change the subject back to themselves. They may change the subject to something entirely different. Or worst case scenario, they often suddenly have to go. This is an unhealthy, imbalanced relationship, even though it may still be a loving relationship where they really do care about you and they really do appreciate you and they really do value your friendship and they really do like you. But they like you in this role in which you are the listener and you are their friend, and it's not quite mutual. As we're going through these, I think it's really important for us to take a moment and reflect and think about, have we ever been this? When I'm hanging out with someone, am I the star? Am I the person always talking about myself? How often do I check in with them? How often do I ask how they are? How often do I take the time to really listen until they're done? So as we're going through these, take a moment and say, who are the stars in my life? Who are these people in my life? And how could I set some boundaries with them? And then on the flip side, when am I that person? The next person kind of personality that we're talking about is the redirector. And this is a person who really subtly ignores or dismisses what you say on a consistent basis. So they're consistently redirecting the conversation to a preferred topic in a manner that just very minutely distracts from your comments or any points that you happen to be making. So this person is really subtle about it. And usually what they're trying to do is avoid addressing the comments you made, the subject that you brought up. And so they just kind of twist things and turn things so that they don't have to discuss that. And this is a famous political move. This is a politician's 101. It's answer the question that you wanted to be asked. So if someone asks you something that's really personal, you'll answer in a way that may not answer that question but is saying something, but it's so subtle of a shift that often it's it kind of gets swept under the rug. That person didn't answer the question at all. And so this is a very, very tricky technique that's often used when someone avoids something that they're uncomfortable with. And maybe there are times where it's not the time and the place to be discussing something like that. Maybe it is something that they're uncomfortable with, and we need to take note to maybe we need to phrase things a little bit differently, or maybe we can address this in a different way so that they are more comfortable. But then on the flip side, we want to make sure we're not being manipulated by this, and we want to make sure we're not doing this all the time, that we feel confident in the ability to address uncomfortable topics. These are people who will make us feel, and you're in this situation, especially in arguments, where this person redirects the conversation to the extent at which you're confused about what you're even talking about anymore. And so often you'll ask a direct question, or you're talking about a very specific topic, and all of a sudden the conversation has gone in a direction that you're confused about how it even got there. And that's when you're talking to someone who uses this tactic to get around having to talk about tough subjects. One common thing is the jokester. Someone will crack a joke. It's a very, very common response to someone who's trying to avoid talking about a certain topic. They change the subject, they redirect to something more shiny. Here's a shiny object, or they crack a joke about it. Those are all different tactics for avoiding talking about something hard. The downside to doing these types of things is they work short term and they solve a problem for us short term. However, often it leaves the other person feeling hurt, feeling deceived, feeling manipulated, and ultimately it snowballs the problem as opposed to just addressing it respectfully right then and there. The next one we're going to talk about is what I call the person who's emotionally unavailable. This is a person who you may, for example, vent to and talk to and share your feelings about something with, and they don't reject you. They don't say anything that's directly hurtful or dismissive or respond with anything that would be harsh in return. This is the person that just becomes a wall, and they are neutral. At best, they'll respond with neutral comments like, okay, so let's say I've had a death in the family, and I'm venting to my friend about how sad I am and the grief and how painful it's been to get up, and I'm having trouble sleeping and blah, 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 blah. And I'm getting into this and just sharing my feelings vulnerably with a person. I may cry. And this is a person who cannot hold space for feelings for themselves. And so they're having trouble holding space for feelings for you as well. For whatever reason. Sometimes it's due to trauma, sometimes it's due to it being personal for them, sometimes it's due to a need for control. And this is an opportunity for them to feel a sense of power or control over you. And so here you are sharing your feelings. You're not getting any validation, you're not getting sympathy or empathy, you're not getting words or love or hugs or kindness, any sense of understanding or connecting with what you're talking about, and you're not getting any follow-up questions. Tell me more about this and what's going on here. You're getting a wall. Just, okay. Kind of that sense of, are you done yet? What's tricky about this kind of person, just like the others, is if you were to say, you're being a jerk or you're being unloving, they'd say, what are you talking about? I didn't say anything. I didn't do anything. I'm just listening. But there's something about their tone and their vibe and their feel that's very neutral and cold. And either way, it's okay if this is something that you've used as a coping skill too, and there's no judgment there, because ultimately what it means is it is too much. It is too much for you to handle. But what's important is if you're the person who's done this to others and who does this, whether it's intentionally or unintentionally, and now you can look back and realize, oh crap, I've done that, is that ultimately these are things that cause a drift in relationships and can cause harm, even though it seems subtle. But what's tricky is when we're passive aggressive, we're hurting someone just as much, if not sometimes more so, than if we were overtly saying how we feel, because that person is still internalizing the feelings. Does that make sense? And so if you've caught yourself doing this, it's really important to say, how could I breathe through this and be vulnerable and present in the moment and still take care of myself? And if this is happening to you, be able to recognize this person, it is not an attack. They are really having a hard time holding space for my feelings and maybe aren't the right person for me to be talking to or venting to. The last one is, this one's a big one, the neglector. This one is a really tricky person, and sometimes we're that person as well. This is a person who does not actively reject us, does not actively say no, and does not put up a fight with regards to participating as a partner, helping as a partner. But this is a person who consistently underperforms and doesn't follow through on promises, or kind of plays a little bit of that, cries wolf and plays that learned helplessness role a little bit so that they can get out of having a responsibility. Okay, if that makes sense. This is different from someone who occasionally forgets to complete a task or occasionally forgets to do something, forgets to call you, or occasionally will take longer on tasks because it's their first time. They're new at something. So you might be better at it, but it may take them a little longer for you to do it because they're new at learning that skill. This is different from a person who plays the constant, I forgot, or I didn't know, or you do it better than me, so I figured I'd let you do it. And people who will even go as far as doing a task incorrectly so that you quit asking them to do it. Okay, so this is a form of manipulation with regards to following through on someone's word, whatever that means, to whatever extent that means. This is a person who is a master at, you all know that phrase, it's easier to ask for forgiveness than permission. This is that person that's like, I'll put it off and then I'll just be super apologetic and super loving and beg them for forgiveness later because I just don't feel like doing it right now. What's so frustrating about this person is the fact that you can't count on them. And what's tricky is you always feel like you can. And then when you can't, what happens is it sets up this scenario in which you quit asking them for support, or you're constantly making up for what they didn't finish. And what happens is this isn't just procrastination. This is a form of manipulation in order to get out of being held responsible for what that person is capable of doing and would contribute to it being an equal relationship. And what's tricky is if that person tries to call you out, if you do this and this person tries to call you out, you can always play you're a tyrant. You can always play that you're such a tyrant, you're such a drill sergeant, you're so needy, you're so controlling, you're so bossy. So what happens is if that person calls you out for basically not fulfilling your duties, you can always play the blame game to get out of taking responsibility for it, and vice versa. If they're the person that's always dropping, then they can always say, oh, you're being so controlling, you're being so particular, you're making a big deal out of nothing. And what's tricky is this person is really hard, it's hard to hold them responsible because ultimately you end up looking like the jerk for saying, hey, I'm disappointed, I was hoping you would follow through on this and you didn't, right? It is okay to hold someone responsible. If you are the person that catches yourself doing this occasionally, just, they'll take care of it, I'll let it go, or she does it better, so I'll just wait till she gets home, or I'll just wait till he gets home. If you catch yourself doing this, no, it is eating at your relationship. And it's eating at it in a really subtle way that one day is going to hit you in the face like a bus. If there is a neglector in the relationship, it is an imbalanced relationship, and over time it is going to eat and erode the health of that relationship. So it's so important that it be addressed right away. Personality that I wanted to discuss that erodes relationships is the person who's the funny guy or the funny girl and is always joking and pleasant and funny and easygoing and easy to hang out with, except for the jokes are always at someone else's expense. And anytime that person takes the opportunity to say, hey, you're being hurtful, They can always get out of taking responsibility for being hurtful because they can always say, oh, you're so serious. You take things so personally. But the jokes are never about themselves. The jokes are always and consistently at someone else's expense. And what happens is, at first it forces you, if you're that person that's, having the jokes made at your expense, at first it makes you feel like, well, maybe I am too serious. Maybe I can't take some heat. Maybe I need to toughen up. Maybe I need to learn to joke more and joke back. Maybe I'm not funny enough, right? It makes us question our sanity and the validity of our feeling. But ultimately, we leave hanging out with that person feeling crappy. And we think something's wrong with us. But it's actually nothing wrong with us. It is someone consistently making us feel crappy because we're the butt of the jokes. It's a way of putting you down in a way in which they don't have to take responsibility for their hurtful words. And it's a passive-aggressive way of gaining power in the relationship by making you feel like crap. So how do we handle that? So first, I just want you guys to be able to recognize these signs of passive-aggressive behavior. If we have these people in our lives, they begin to erode in very dangerous ways. And so I just wanted to take an opportunity for us to evaluate who are we spending our time with? How do they make us feel when we're with them? How are we making others feel when they're with us? Are there subtle ways in which we might be hurting the people that we love without intending to? Are there subtle ways for us to be avoiding taking responsibility for the impact we have on others? And how might that be eroding our relationships?